Well, hello, everybody. It's good to see you. I have a little story about my Aunt Golden today. She's a rich tapestry of life experience that I never can fail to go to the well and find something fun to tell you all about. I want to talk to you today about her driving and her driving history. She used to talk about being very proud when she was a young woman, and I'm thinking it was around 1919 to 1923, somewhere in there. She bought a Model T, and she used to talk about how it had isinglass curtains, and that was some early form of plastic window thing that you could roll up and down that would protect. I believe it was a four-door touring car so that she could take her parents or some other people and have enough room. She said her daddy told her not to come home with one that you had to crank yourself because he didn't want to see her with a broken arm, and so she got one that had an automatic or an electric start. I'm not real sure what you call that. But she was very, very pleased with herself, and I believe she told me that she paid $500 because it had some of these extras. So to celebrate this and to honor her parents, she wanted to take them somewhere in the new car. So she chose the Urbana Hotel on a Sunday for a nice Sunday afternoon meal after church. So that was a big adventure, and I'm sure my great-grandparents were not used to going out to restaurant meals very much, and she was very pleased with herself that it was something she was able to do for them. So they get over there. She said the server took their order. It was a nice hotel. It was on the water down in Urbana. I remember the building. When they came with the food, she said her daddy announced that he wanted to say grace, and she said his voice just boomed. She guessed he'd gotten warmed up in church. It sounded like he was in an outdoor tabernacle trying to call across a field, that she was just seriously embarrassed, and that she peeped up and people were looking at them, and she was just really mortified and embarrassed. So she said, but they got through that, and they had a nice lunch, and that they didn't come and take your money at the table as they would now, that there was a counter or a stand or somewhere where there was a hostess or a manager, and she went there to pay the bill. And it was a young woman, not much older than herself, and she said, she reached out and took her hand, and she said, dear, she says, I want to apologize to you because I've been watching you with your parents, and I really had to fight a feeling of envy. She says, my father's been gone for a long time, and he wasn't a godly person, and looking at you there with your sweet parents, she says, it just made me wonder if you realize how blessed you are. And my aunt said that she was so humbled in that moment and felt so low. She doesn't remember when she ever felt so low about anything that she had really done, that she resolved to be a better person. And that stuck with her all those years, and she wanted to make sure I knew about it. She was always trying to give me the benefit of her advice to keep me out of potholes. A little pun there on the car story. So fast forward a long way to about 1988, and I get a phone call from my dad, and he said that he and Mother wanted to make sure that I and Wilson would come for lunch on Sunday, that he had decided he wanted to talk to my aunt about slowing down and getting more help at home and possibly stop driving, that he knew her eyesight was getting worse and her hearing was getting worse, and he just thought it was time. And I thought, oh no, this is not good. But I said, yes, sir. So Wilson excused himself after lunch. He typically, if we weren't going somewhere, took a nap. I don't know what his excuse was that day, but I remember he left. And Mother didn't dawdle after lunch with putting things away. We all went and sat in the family room, and Daddy started. Well, I honestly did not know that he had the ability in him to be as diplomatic as he was that day. He was almost an artist. He was painting such a beautiful picture with his words. He told her that he had something on his mind he'd like to discuss, and he said that she had worked so hard all her life and that she had been prudent about saving sort of for her old age. And he said, this is it. And that if she had some more help, she could go and do things that she'd been putting off, or just making life easier. And he just kept on. He said, you know, you could break a hip down the road and have help imposed on you. But if you get somebody now, you can train them the way you like to have things done. And you really, you had help for your parents when they were older. And now you need to do the same thing for yourself. What do you think of that? And she stood and said, thank you. I appreciate everything you've said, but I'll make that decision when the time comes, hand on hip. And she turned to me and asked me to find her handbag. And she thanked Mother for a lovely lunch. And she was out the door. And they were devastated. I don't know why they thought it was going to go well, but Daddy had high hopes. And he really did give it his best shot. But it did not go well. And I said, it's just really occurred to me that she's going to be 93 in August, and I'm pretty sure her driver's license expires. So you won't have to be the heavy. The state is going to take care of this because I know she can't pass the eye exam. And that's just going to be the end of it. And it's going to be hard, but that'll force her hand. So, yeah, that was true. And Daddy said he hoped that an angel would stay on her shoulder and everybody else's. So the day of the actual DMV visit, back in those days, the Division of Motor Vehicles came to Matthews the 2nd and 4th Fridays, and they set up in the rescue squad building near the courthouse. So that morning she said, I'm a little bit nervous, and I'd like for you to go with me this afternoon. And I said, yes, ma'am. And she said, I think we'll go right after lunch. I said, that sounds good. So we left, and everybody at the Golden Brook shop had a heavy heart because none of us thought it was going to go well, and she was keeping very quiet. So we get there, and we walk in the door, and they had set up the rescue squad they take the vehicles out of the bays, and they put what I call church tables end to end in the back, and behind those were probably 4 Division of Motor Vehicles employees. And they were all looking at clipboards and paperwork. They weren't looking up at the people that were gathered at the back. And I'd say that it was 14, 15, 17 people standing there in the back. Some of them were like me. They were just accompanying other people. And she looked around, and she looked at the other people, and she looked at the officers, and she looked at her watch, and it was past the time that they should be working with people. So she just marched her little self up there and stood in front of one of them, and he looked up and he says, good afternoon, how can I help you? And immediately, all the other people, like a herd of sheep, they all went and made these nice orderly lines in front of the other 3 representatives. And I thought to myself, if the 93-year-old has to come in here today and show everybody else how to even get helped, this might not go the way that I think it's going to go. So it wasn't long before they administered the eye test to her, and I was at the back of the room, but I could still tell that she was not doing very well with it. And I heard him tell her that she had failed the test. And I thought, oh dear, this reality is so sad. Hand on hip. Well, could you tell me, please, what are my options? I thought, what are your options? What is she talking about? There's no options. She failed the test. And the man said, well, yes, ma'am. He said, here's a form. He handed her this form, and he said, if you go to your regular eye doctor, they'll give you a more detailed exam. And if you pass, they'll fill this out, and you just bring it back, and we'll give you your license. And she said, thank you so much. She sailed on by me, and don't try this at home, but she used to call me Frankie if she was feeling an urgency about something, and I don't like it. I didn't mind it from her, but I don't like it from anybody else. And she said, Frankie, we're going to Gloucester. And I said, yes, ma'am. So we go get in the car, and of course there's no cell phones. And I said, Sissy, we don't have an appointment, but this is a matter of urgency. I know they'll see me. I said, yes, ma'am. So we go to Gloucester. Well, I was a frequent visitor to the eye doctors in Gloucester, not for myself, but I took her, I took my mom, I took my mother's sister, I took our neighbor, Mrs. Wilson. I took my friend Pat Gill. I had a whole list of people that had had cataract surgeries and follow-ups and appointments. And one day when I was in there waiting for one of them, the receptionist came out and she said, "Dear, I noticed that you have a lot of clients from Matthews, and we have other people from Matthews from time to time who need transportation. Would you like for me to get your name and number and I can offer up your services?" And I said, "Oh, well, thank you. No, I'm just bringing my loved ones." And she said, "Oh, very well." So I knew the drill in there, and I went to the window and I explained why we were there. She says, "Oh, they'd be happy to give her the test and that the nurse could do it. The doctor didn't have to administer it. And it would just be a minute." So they came and got her. They took her in the back. And the nurse stuck her head around the door to me and she says, "Please don't worry." She says, "This is very cut and dried. She'll either pass it or she won't. It's clear cut." I said, "Okay, thank you so much." So a few minutes later, she comes out. She's waving her piece of paper. "Frankie, we're going back to the DMV." And I said, "Yes, ma'am." So back to the DMV. So she sails in. She's stepping a little higher at this point, as you can imagine. That would be an expression she'd use herself. We got there. They took her picture. They gave her a temporary license. And I heard him discuss something with her about they were transitioning to a new system about the renewals. And not everyone was being renewed for the same length of time. And I thought, well, that's good. And some people would get a 2-year renewal, some 3, some 5, some 7, just to get everyone on the same system going forward, because it was something new they were doing. So I thought, oh, good. Well, maybe this is like a 2-year renewal. So we get in the car. She hands me her driver's license, temporary permit, without a word. I open and give a glance, and they renewed it to 1995. It was on her 100th birthday. They gave her the maximum 7 years. I can't begin to tell you. I didn't feel like my tax money was being very well spent in that moment, but she was euphoric. And by this time, we'd been gone from the Golden Brook shop for 3.5, 4 hours at least. And I think they probably thought that we had gone to cry somewhere. But we sailed back in. She was so happy. I called my parents. I called my Aunt Jane. Nobody could believe it. She was just so happy. She kept her car. She stopped driving on her own at 98, but not until she had been stopped one Sunday morning. Well, actually, police wanted to stop her, but I don't think they quite caught her. She was on her way to church, and she pulled into the churchyard, and about that time she saw the flashing lights. And I guess because when she got out of the car holding her Bible, that they didn't have the heart to give her a ticket, but they gave her a stern warning that it was 35 through there and she needed to slow down. And that did lighten up her heavy foot there for a while. So my moral for today's tale is, if you get some labels put on you or some limits that you're not real comfortable with, don't forget to ask, what are my options? Because you might be surprised that something will actually go in the favor of that you want. Take care, everybody.